First continues now with State of Play, and it's the yin and yang of the political world with us this week. Greg Lavelle is the representative from Sharpley, among other things, and Steve Martelli, Wilmington City Councilman, is with him. We call them the dueling cousins. However, there is one thing you guys agree on right now. The news from DelDOT gets just almost worse and worse as we learn more about what's going on. Who wants to jump in first?
I'm sure Greg would.
I'll go first. It does, and it's very disappointing. And I acknowledge the work of Secretary Bott. He came into this job, and then it really kicked him in the shin once he got there. And the forensic work they've done, and that's all good. And we've seen what's come out, but we don't know what happened. I mean, when you had such an uncontrolled environment, and it really was, and that's proven by their own reports. What was missed, what wasn't done, what other things have put the state in jeopardy. And what I've heard from constituents over the last couple of days is, okay, so they've done this, they said we had all these problems, but no one's accountable. Right. While it's forensics, it almost seems like it's an approach in anthropology. We're going to go back. It wasn't that long ago. This isn't the Stone Ages, and yet no one's held accountable. No names are named, no one's dismissed, there's no accountability, and even when you go back a year with the other issues they had, so somebody retired and they moved some deck chairs on the Titanic, and it undermines the faith in government, it undermines the faith in DelDOT and all that DelDOT wants to do and needs to do.
Yeah. Well, let's take a step back actually, because Secretary Bott is quoted as saying, if DelDOT were a business, we would be out of business by now.
I don't disagree with that at all.
A lot of uncashed checks.
Sure.
Missing documents. Did either of you have any idea it was this bad?
I don't know. I mean, I certainly don't have as probably much direct contact as Greg might, but I mean, to me, I think, you hear the rumblings in dealing with DelDOT folks, and I think there's a big difference between the folks who are out there doing the stuff, boots on the ground every single day, and the type of stuff that we're talking about here. But, I think, to just digress for a quick moment, I think the governor did the right thing by bringing Secretary Bott in. He brought someone from outside to take a look at this thing with a different set of eyes, because the reality is what we're seeing and what a lot of people have known is that the problems are systemic. That even if you try to do a couple things like shifting people here and moving things there, the problems are going to continue until someone steps up and says, this is going to stop, we're going to put policies in effect, we're going to hold people accountable, we're going to say, okay, if you do this, you're going to be, and I'm not one to advocate mass firings, but I think clearly this is a situation where you say, hey, this happened on your watch, whether you're a mid-level manager or whether you're the executive director or whatever in between, you have a span of control which you're responsible for, and you let things happen. And I just don't necessarily know if a cultural attitude is a defense to allow someone to continue.
And back to your point about wanting to see names being named, Secretary Bott said there was no criminal activity
that we know of. He even admits that we don't know what we don't know. And it is a cultural thing, and it's a failure. And I'll name names. You go back to the Minter administration, the people that were in charge of DelDOT at that point. You had the land deals, sort of the wild, wild west. We'll do whatever we want to do and not worried about the law. And that sets the culture as you go down in an organization. Sure. You have the failures with the Indian River Inlet Bridge. Now we're $50 million in and suing all sorts of people on that. And it is a cultural thing, and again, this isn't what happened, in our government 150 years ago. This is less than 10 years ago. People are very frustrated that there's no accountability, and putting policies in place is great, but as the Secretary said, we'd be out of business, and that's it's not an excuse.
Do you agree with Steve's point about mid-level managers, people lose their jobs because things happened under their watch, even if they may not be responsible directly?
2,000 plans were not filed in Kent County. 2,000. Don't they have monthly meetings? Right. I mean, again, I'm the guys who fill the potholes and go out there and
hump it
do
every
the
day.
Very difficult and often dangerous work. Standing on sides of roads with people going by, and it makes their job actually more difficult because the stereotype of a transportation worker is, 7 guys standing around looking for somebody to pick up the shovel, and that's not fair. But that perpetuates the stereotype when you have all these headlines, and it's just simply not fair.
And I think another unintended consequence of this is what's going to end up happening, in my opinion, is that you're going to have these policies that are put into place. You're going to have all of these restrictions that are there, and then things that are running smoothly. however limited they may be, are now going to be impacted because you're going to throw this huge net over everything, and and the people who are going to be directly impacted are going to be the constituents, because they're the ones who see firsthand the fellow on the street filling that pothole, who now has to jump through 3 more hoops than he did before, because the things that were being done. He had nothing to do with that, but he's going to be directly impacted as a result.
And you know, actually, Steve, that's a good point. But that speaks to Governor Markell and Secretary Bott now to put in correct policies, to not overreact and hold somebody accountable. I mean, that's really what the public's looking for.
Should Governor Ruth Ann Minner be kind of talked about in all of this at all?
I just did.
Yeah.
I mean, there but for the grace of God go I is not a defense for anything. I don't care if you're in the private sector or the public sector, and there seems to be an element of that. I'm not going to criticize anybody in case I'm the next guy with my head on the chopping block. And how your head gets on the chopping block is worthy of debate, but you know, don't pick on me, I won't pick on you. That's not the way to run a government.
Well, I don't.
No, on the merits, you know, don't, you know, frivolous, you know, character assassinations and attacks that have no basis in reality. It's clearly unfair. But when there's failures of government, systemic failures in government, to use the Secretary's words, somebody needs to be held accountable. It's pretty simple.
And I mean, I don't want to beat up anybody specifically like that either. But I mean, it's the problem with one of the things that concerns me about about politics in Delaware is one of the problems with politics in Delaware is nobody wants to talk about the white elephant in the room, which is how did all this happen under someone's command who was up there for, you know, however long he or she was there and allowed this to continue. I don't know how we don't talk about it and bring you know, the former governor into the conversation and look at the way things.
Let her defend it. Let her. It wasn't me. You know, maybe it went back. Who knows what it was? So who knows?
The Bloom groundbreaking was this week, and there were a lot of people that went on stage and talked and sang Governor Markell's praises. Do you think the governor, he's this guy who political pundits say can't not win the next election?
He's lucky I'm not running against him.
If Greg were running, would he have your vote, Steve?
Look at the time. Boy, I got to.
It's live.
You know, what do you think about that? Is that just Markell's ongoing likability, or is he that good? Or
I think that the governor is an extremely bright guy, and I think one of the things that shows how bright he is that he surrounds himself with bright people. And I think when you have bright people, they bring bright ideas, and they recognize that they don't hold the monopoly on good ideas, and they're open to conversations that are open to ideas. And they also get that in order to make yourself viable, and I know that Greg probably doesn't agree with me to some extent on this, because we have disagreed about this in the past, but you got to spend a little money, and if even that means spend a little bit of taxpayer money to bring these companies into the state, you got to do that. And I think he has done that very well. Now, some folks are probably going to take a shot at him over the Fisker thing, and I get that, but you know, Fisker's got bigger problems than that. I mean, they're going to have probably, I would guess there's going to be an Inspector General's investigation into. I would think that there might be into all that at a federal level and everything else. But you know, I think the governor's done a great job bringing folks like Bloom and recruiting these businesses to come in and looking ahead what Bloom represents with regards to their perspective. Excuse me, their product and everything else. Looking ahead beyond 2012 and beyond 2016 and whatever the next election cycle is for the governor. I think he's really making sound decisions for the future of the state. So I think he's hitting a home run almost every time up to the plate.
So you like him then?
He's okay. Yeah, absolutely. You weren't supposed to beat up on the gov. We had a
oh, that's right. We did talk about that. You know, the governor's a very likable guy. He's a smart guy. He engages vis-a-vis perhaps the former governor, and he's not afraid to go out to a high school or whatever. And I think that's part of his appeal to the public and also to the media. You know, the use of government. I voted for Bloom. I hope it works. You know, my socks get a little tight on it sometimes. I've kidded some of the governor's staff. Next time there's an economic development project, you know, can we not have customers come with it? And I voted for it. But I mean, there's an element of that. I mean, you know, and you've seen the Cylindras and the national thing, and I guess it's a telltale sign that, you know, sometimes the pendulum swings too far to one side or the other, and maybe it's time to trim the sails on that. I hope Bloom's a smashing success.
I think that
I do, but you know, but that's part of a responsibility of anybody, particularly if you're in a position that I'm in, is to raise questions. It's the silence that we referred to in the earlier discussion that actually becomes corrosive, and to question things. It doesn't mean that I don't want things to be succeed.
Well, I think that's your responsibility.
A very nice guy. We have we understand, and frank conversations are a good thing to have.
But I think one of the reasons why he is successful is because he's not afraid to make a mistake. He's not afraid to take the chance and say, okay, look, cylinder, everybody's going to beat up, and they're going to continue to beat up on that for however long. But in order to do that, as the old saying goes, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs sometimes, and that can mean a lot of different things. But I think the governor said, you know what, I'm going to take the one, I took a hit on Fisker, but I'm going to get 10 more Blooms coming in, and if I had to take the hit on the Fisker for the 10 more Blooms, I'm okay with that, and I think that's a good approach, and that's the businessman's approach that he kind of brings to that office that maybe we haven't seen in the past.
Kind of forgive me for jumping around, but want to talk about the DART employee who.
Sweet.
These
I'll let Steve defend this one.
Okay.
Can you? How do you defend this one?
Let's give a little background here to people at home. The employee leaves. He had so much vacation, sick time accrued, gets paid huge amount of money.
$35,000.
Yeah.
And then he resigned. Is that right? And then he comes back.
Yep.
Gets rehired a week later.
Yeah, he was, as I understand, he was the human resources manager for DART, which is a quasi-government agency, which is a bad thing to be, because then they claim that they're not
but they
accountable
dollars,
to the government, and they get 98% of their funding from the state. They have different accrual policies with respect to sick time and unused vacation time. He decides to leave the employee of DART, gets $35,000, gets hired back like 10 days later into the same position. And part of the reason he was allowed to accrue all this time is because he was so critical.
Right. That's the argument.
That's the argument.
Right.
Well, if he was so critical, they knew he was leaving. They
How come that spot wasn't filled?
Never made a move. They never posted. They never did anything to replace this critical position that we cannot do without. I mean, it just stinks to high heaven. And when you get into the discussion about quasi-government agencies, sustainable energy utility, and all these other things, they think they're created in Dover, and I see this all the time. They're created by the General Assembly, and then they sort of thumb their nose at the General Assembly and say, well, you can't touch us. We're a quasi. What? That's just silly. And you see these abuses, and you see the problems with the SEU, and that speaks to we need to be careful when we control these things.
And that kind of goes back to the conversations that we've had about open government with regard to one person with a $40,000 budget overseeing all these complaints about in the integrity and ethics and that kind of thing. But with regard to DART, I understand that there's folks accrue time, it's their time, the sick time, but I think the biggest and when you separate from an organization like that, you are entitled to. That's probably negotiated within the CB and the collective bargaining agreement. It's probably negotiated within somewhere.
But this guy's he's not in any CB.
He could be in the white collar. He could be in the white collar.
Another
union.
reason not to have that.
There we go.
Well, regardless, it kind of, there's something fishy.
Well, yeah,
that's
I think Greg's
by
point
the public.
is huge, though. I mean, if this guy's so critical and he's getting ready to leave, and it's not like he told you on the 1st he's leaving on the 2nd. I imagine he had to give it 30 days, if not 30 days, at least 2 weeks.
Like he was treated,
right.
Absolutely.
And then, so even if it's 2 weeks, there's still 4 work weeks that have passed that position hasn't even been posted. I mean, that doesn't define critical to me.
And this wasn't 10 years ago. This wasn't some previous administration. This was like 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Where's the accountability?
Right. That's what it comes down to. Where's the accountability?
Where is the governor on this? What changes are being implemented? I don't mean that critically, but I've gotten emails from state employees that said, what about my sick time? They cut me off under state policy. I had all this accrued sick time. I wasn't allowed to take it. I wasn't allowed to cash out and come back and just go right back onto the pension train. It's abusive. And for anyone to say it's not abusive, they're just not being honest. And sorry, Steve.
No, go on.
And they also got an attorney general's opinion. So what, you went to an attorney general's opinion? Apparently you were looking for a little CYA.
Well, the other thing about it that I think that really disturbs me when you talk about the state employees is that obviously this guy was one of the boys, and so he was taken care of. But the regular, guy who does his or her job is not going to be treated with that same level of benefit. He's not going to get that same $35,000 check when they leave. The job, whether it's as a custodian or snowplower, or the guys and girls who are out there humping it every single day that allow government to function. And then you get the one guy who maybe knows the inner workings of the HR, and he's made some friends with folks, and now all of a sudden he's going to get taken care of on the way out.
He saw the policy and jumped on it.
Right.
All right, guys, we are out of time, but you guys could go on all day about this.
He's always wrong.
It must be tough being wrong.
Representative Greg Lavelle, Councilman Steve Martelli, thank you for being on State of Play.